Hello, my name is Paul F. Aubin, and I'd like to welcome you to this presentation of the Revit Express Tools, the Shared Parameter Manager. I'm the author of several hands-on books and videos on Revit. You can learn more at lynda.com. I do hands-on training and consulting services for many architectural clients around the country, and you can visit my website at paulaubin.com and follow me on Twitter. So let's dig into the Revit Express Tools Shared Parameter Manager. The Shared Parameter Manager is a wonderful tool to help you manage all of your shared parameter needs. So in my consulting business, I do a lot of content work for my clients, and that often involves working with shared parameters, as you might expect. So for example, if you're in an architectural firm, and you have 2 or 3 architects creating content on a regular basis, they probably need to work with some shared parameters. So the Shared Parameter Manager gives us a lot of tools to manage shared parameter files in a more efficient way than what's provided in the out-of-the-box tools. So let's go ahead and take a look here. I'm going to click the Shared Parameter Manager on the Revit Express Tools tab. And in the dialog that appears, it's organized in a 2-pane configuration on the Manage Shared Parameter File tab. Now, what you can do here on this tab is really pretty much anything that you can do in the out-of-the-box interface, but it's just a little bit more tidy and efficient. So for example, I could click New here and create a brand new shared parameter file. So I'll just call this my params and save it. That'll load that in right there. Now, when you're working with a shared parameter file in the out-of-the-box interface, you can't add any parameters to it until you add groups, at least one group. So the same is true here in the CTC Express Tools. I'll click the Add button right here to add a new group. And you can add more than one group if you want to. So perhaps I'll do something like length and yes, no. So you can just separate each one with a return, and when you click OK, it will add those 2 groups. Now I can select either one of these groups, and that will make these buttons available over here in the top column, and I'll be able to click Add here and add my first parameter. Now the parameter, the group name is called length. It's common discipline. I'm going to keep that, and I'm going to create some length parameters. So maybe I'm working with some curtain panels, and I want to define a curtain panel width and height and maybe thickness. So I'll give these a name here. And a relatively new feature in Revit is the ability to add tooltips to your parameters. So if you like, you can actually add those directly in the shared parameter. And when I sort of tab through this, notice that I'm actually able to create more than one parameter right here in the same dialog. Now, this is actually one of the things I really like about this tool, because it allows me to create several parameters very quickly without having to go through a series of dialogues over and over again. So I'm just going to kind of create a couple of these here. Like so. Now, there's also a batch add over here, so if you find it a little easier to work in this dialog, you can actually create several names, separate each one with a carriage return to put them on a separate line, and then they'll all appear right here. But I'll just start with these 3, and I'll click Create. Now, if I had a yes/no parameter that I wanted to add, I could add that as well, and maybe it could be something like, since I'll stay on the curtain panel theme, and you just want to make sure you choose the correct parameter type right here. So I'll choose yes no from this list, and then I'll click Create, and so I've got my yes no parameter listed here, and I've got the others here. Now, there's other tools over here in the middle. So if I decided for some reason that I wanted the show spandrel yes/no parameter that I just created to actually be with the other length parameters, I could click Move here and choose the group I want to move it to. But I think I'll leave it in the yes/no, so I'll just cancel out of there. If I want to create other yes/no parameters that had similar settings as the first one, I could duplicate this one. You could add prefixes and suffixes. You can do find and replace when you have a really complex list of parameters and you want to search through them. And you can even delete parameters. So maybe I change my mind about the panel thickness and I decide I want to delete that. Now, if you do anything that actually appreciably changes the shared parameter file, the same rules will apply here in CTC Express Tools that actually applied in that apply directly in the Revit interface. So in other words, deleting a shared parameter will give me a similar kind of warning that I would see in Revit, telling me that if I've already got content that relies on this parameter, that I need to keep that in mind, that once this parameter is gone, it's gone. You can't get it back. But I haven't used it yet, so I'll just go ahead and say yes there. The same is true with modify. So if I click modify here, I could change the name of the parameter. Right here, I could change the kind of parameter. Now, some of these things you're not actually able to do in the normal Revit interface. These things become grayed out when you once you create the shared parameter. But here, you're actually able to change just about anything. However, if I did do that, let's say I change this to panel W, and I click OK. It'll give me a similar kind of warning that will tell me that this actually has to change the GUID, the Global Unique Identifier. So in a way, that's similar to having actually deleted the original parameter and then create a new one in its place. So the Shared Parameter Manager is just doing this in a little bit more efficient way, but really behind the scenes, that's what it has to do. It actually has to delete out the parameter and create a new one, and it does get this new GUID. So what I'm going to do is click No here and cancel this. I'm not actually going to rename that, but those are some of the features that you have available here when creating this brand new shared parameter file. Now, of course, when you're done with all this, you can click the Save button right here. It'll tell you it's been successful, and I now have this new shared parameter file. Now, another thing that comes up pretty frequently, especially when you're working on content for other folks like I am, is the existence of multiple shared parameter files. Now, best practice says that we really should only ever have one shared parameter file. If at all, we can avoid it. So that would be desirable. That's what we want to strive for. But there's plenty of scenarios where you could end up with multiple shared parameter files. Maybe you're downloading content from a manufacturer and they include a shared parameter file. Maybe you're in the situation that I'm in, where you're creating content for other folks, and each client that you work for has different shared parameters, and so those would be stored in different shared parameter files. I have a file for each client that I work with. Maybe that scenario where I talked about before, where you have more than one architect working simultaneously on content, and they got their wires crossed a little, and they didn't realize that the other one already created a shared parameter file, so they created their own. So what do you do about situations like that? Well, this interface actually allows us to load more than one shared parameter file. So I can come over here to this column and click the Browse button. And what I'm going to do is load a second shared parameter file, like perhaps this one right here, my PFA parameters master. This is where I kind of store all of my shared parameters. So I'm going to open that up. And as you can see, there's quite a few groupings and parameters in this file. Now, on both sides, you have these little icons right here that allow you to expand the groups. So that's kind of handy because you can expand the entire file and see them all organized right here. Another thing that I really like is you can group it by the groups. So these are the actual groups within the shared parameter file. I have, AU, and I have my name here, but you can also group it by parameter type. So when I choose that, now it switches that to the kind of parameter. So these are all my length parameters. You can see I have quite a few of those. Here's my material parameters. I just have the one. Here's a number. Here's some text. So that can be more helpful sometimes to actually organize them that way. You even have a filter option up here that allows you to find duplicate ones or look for naming issues. So right here, it's telling me that this parameter contains illegal characters, with the parentheses around it. So I could identify those things and try and fix those problems in my shared parameter file. Now, let's say that I wanted these parameters that I created over here to be part of my master file. This side is read-only, so it says it's read-only here. So what you do is you click this little button right here, and that switches from one side to the other. Then what I can do is expand this out, and let's say I wanted the show spandrel parameter to be part of my master file. So I just have to find the grouping that I want to include it in, and let's see, I'll just put it under the other grouping for now, and I'm just going to grab it here and drag it and highlight the other grouping right there, and it will just add it right over there. So now I've just added that parameter to the file. I could do the same thing with the two that I have under length, but I believe I already have those in my master shared parameter file. So if I do try and add them, so just sort of drag that over here somewhere, it's going to tell me that I already have one with that name. Okay, so I'll just close out of there instead and not do that. So that's how I can drag between the two files and copy shared parameters. So again, if you're trying to manage these two shared parameter files that you might inadvertently have created in your office, you can compare them on the both sides here and then drag and drop between to kind of merge them all together into a single master shared parameter file, and that can help you tidy things up and make everything work a little bit more smoothly. And then of course don't forget to save when you're done to update that file. Okay. Now, one of the nice things that this will do when you save the file is it will actually create a backup here with a little number at the end of the name. So you can see how I created my master file here with a number 2 now at the end. So just in case I need to go back and restore the original, I'll have that backup copy right there that I can use. Once I have some of these parameters, okay, you can start to look at using them back in your project. So what I'm going to do here is back in the project, I have some casework. What I want to do is load a different shared parameter file. So I'm going to click Browse here. I'm going to load up a client shared parameter file, this one right here, and click Open. So I've got this file loaded up over here, and there are some yes/no parameters listed down here. You can see I've got a little bit of inconsistency here. Some of them say include air, include data, include gas, and some of them just say, vacuum and waste and, cold water, electrical. Now, let me close this for a minute and show you the schedule here that I have in this file. In this file, I've got all of these columns with a series of checkboxes. And so for each of the items in this schedule, I can check the box to decide whether or not to include that service for that item. Now, if I check the box, you can see it starts off being double dash here, but when I check it, it changes to yes. So all I've done is do a calculated value that looks at the checkbox, and if the box is checked, it says yes, and if it's not checked, it does the double dash. Now, this is my working schedule, but over here on the casework list, I want it to just look like this. I just want to see the yeses and nos. Maybe I want the checkboxes to be a little bit more self-descriptive, and I want to add that word include in front of the name. Okay, so real simple task. So let me go back to Revit Express Tools. Let me go back to the shared parameter manager, and I'll do some of those parameters that are not quite complete yet. So let me load that same file back up. Here's my yes/no parameters. So again, some of these are done already. Include air, include data. So what I'm going to do here is select electrical, and I'm going to modify that and put the word include in front of it. Now, as we've already discussed, if I click OK here, it will warn me that this is going to create a new GUID. But perhaps I'm trying to tidy things up and I don't like the fact that I have different parameters with different names. So I'm going to go ahead and do this here. And in the next step, you'll see that we have another Express tool that will help us tidy it up even at the project level. So I'm going to go ahead and say yes. Let me just do one or two more. Let me modify vacuum as well. And click OK. And then let's do waste as well, right? So I'll just do those 3 for now. Include waste, click OK, answer yes here. Let's save that file. So that updates the shared parameter file, and then let me close out of here. Now I want to go to manage, make sure the shared parameter file is actually loaded. So I'm going to go to shared parameters here, click browse, and choose that shared parameter file, and that loads it up. Okay, and so you can see here under yes, no, that all of my include parameter names are now listed there. The definitions that are used in this project are actually different because they have the old names and the old GUIDs. So now I need to update what we have here in this project to reflect those changes. If I tried to do this manually in the interface, it would take quite a lot of time because I'd have to go into project parameters, I'd have to select each one individually, and I'd have to swap it out with the new parameter. But using the Express tools, we have this schedule parameter resolver right here. So I'm going to click that. And this will list out the schedules that are in my current project. So I'll select my casework list here, and that'll list out all of the parameters that are currently in that schedule. So I changed the electrical parameter to include electrical. So now all I have to do is come over here and select the correct one. So include electrical, and I can do it again for vacuum, include vacuum, and one more time for waste. Now I just did the 3, but I could do all of them if I want to. And now I just simply click OK here, and it will replace all of those schedule parameters with the correct new versions that I have, and that resolves any conflicts that would otherwise occur. And now my schedule is up to date here. I'd actually need to replace those parameters in the working view as well, but it would be the same process. That's a way that we can do the take the shared parameters that we changed in the shared parameter file with the shared parameter manager, and then we can swap them out over here to update the casework list. So what if you have a project that has lots of shared parameters in it? Like, for instance, this one. Okay, so this is a client project, actually, and there's a lot of different pieces of content in here. Some of the shared parameters are using project parameters. Some of them are coming in through nested content. And maybe, again, I'm trying to tidy everything up and gather all of those shared parameters together into a single location. So another feature of the shared parameter manager is that we can export the shared parameters out of the current file. So right here at the top is an export shared parameter button, and you can do it from the current project. So this would just do all the project parameters in the project, or you can do it from the project and its families. So what's really interesting here is, let's say that you have a whole bunch of content that uses shared parameters. Maybe you have a whole folder full of casework, or a whole folder full of door families that are all using shared parameters, and it's kind of a mishmash of lots of different shared parameters. Load those families into a project, and then use this tool right here, and you can export the whole collection of them in one step. Okay, so I'm going to choose the project and families option. This will ask me for a name of shared parameter file to create here. So I'll just create one called export and save it. You'll see it progress bar here. It tells me it was successful. Now let's browse right to that new file, export, and take a look at it. And here it created a group called default, and these are all the shared parameters that it found within that file. Now at this point, I could add more groups. I could rename the default group. Once I've added the groups, I could move the shared parameters around. I could even modify the individual shared parameters. It's just another shared parameter file now, and I could do all the other things that I showed you in the previous example. Furthermore, you could load a second shared parameter file over here and kind of merge the two together, just like we already talked about. This is a real easy way to kind of mine your existing projects for shared parameters that might have become orphaned from the shared parameter file. And so if you kind of want to do a clean sweep through all your content, this is a great way to do that. Now, incidentally, if you do have a lot of those families that you want to load in to a master project, you don't have to do it manually. There's a free Revit Express tool called the Family Loader, which will help you get the job done very quickly. So it will allow you to just point to a folder full of families, and it will load them all into the current project. So do that first, and then run the export to grab all of those shared parameters. The next thing I want to show you is I've got this piece of content right here, and it's just this custom shower. And the way this custom shower works, let me zoom in a little bit here. You can see a shower head here and the controls, and it's in the center of the shower. And then over here on the properties palette, I have this parameter right here called shower head location. And if we click on it, it's actually a little drop-down list, center, left, right. Now, you didn't miss anything. Revit hasn't added the drop-down list parameter just yet. I'm kind of hopeful for that. That's one of my wish list items. But in the meantime, what I'm actually using here is a family types parameter. So if you've seen family types parameters before, then that's all I'm doing here. Okay, so I've got these three choices, and if you actually look at this parameter carefully, you can see that I'm creating those three choices just as detail item families. So I created three detail items, one called center, one called left, one called right, nested them into that shower family, and that's what's creating the list. Choose left, the shower head moves to the left. Choose right, shower head moves to the right. It works really great, and you're saying, wow, that's really cool. What's actually making that work? How can a detail item drive the location of a shower head? And if you scroll through the list of properties, either here on Properties Palette or here in Edit Type, you don't really see any clues, okay? Because there's really nothing in here to indicate what's going on. So what I'm taking advantage of there is a couple features that are built into shared parameters. And one important feature is that you can actually make parameters that are invisible. So what you do is, if you're doing this old school manually, is you create the shared parameter and then you go into the shared parameter file manually and you actually edit the shared parameter file and change some of the values here to make it invisible. So some of these ones have to turn to zeros. Now, the trouble is, what's the very first thing that the shared parameter file tells you not to do? It says this is a shared parameter file and you should not edit it manually. So while you can have some success breaking that rule and doing it, it's also a little risky and you might break the shared parameter file and have to kind of start all over again. So this is another place where the shared parameter manager really excels, because it allows us to create these custom parameters that utilize these hidden features like making a parameter invisible. And you can do it very quickly and easily directly in the shared parameter manager. So what I'm going to do is select this family. I'm going to edit it and show you what's going on behind the scenes. And then I'll show you how I could create those same parameters using the shared parameter manager. So here we are inside the family. And if I go to family types, this is that list parameter, so-called list parameter. Again, it's a detail item family types parameter. It has the 3 choices because I have those 3 families nested in. The reason it works, the way it works, is if you scroll down to the other category, what I have here is 6 other parameters that are required to make this whole thing work. 3 more family types and 3 checkboxes. The 3 family types need to be permanently set to left, right, and center. So these are just duplicates of that same shower head location property up top. It's just that I set this one to left, this one to right, this one to center. Then over here, I have 3 formulas that compare the shower head location to each of these 3. And if they're equal, it checks the box for us. And the way it works is only one of them will be equal. So only one of the boxes will be checked. And these check boxes drive one of the 3 shower head locations. So inside the family, you can see there's actually 3 of them. And we're just hiding the other 2 at any given time. All right, great. So that's wonderful. How did all this come into play? Well, what I've done is I typically use the letters INV in front of the names of my invisible parameters just to remind myself in the family editor that they are in fact invisible. How do you create those? Well, if you don't want to do it manually, you go to your shared parameter manager, and when you create your new parameter, so let me load a file here. Okay, so here's the file that's used to create that family. For example, this parameter right here, if we modify it, this is a yes/no parameter, and notice there's a visible checkbox right here, and you just uncheck it. So here with the shared parameter manager, it's really easy to make an invisible parameter because you just simply uncheck the box, and that's all there is to it. So if I had this length parameter, right, or let's do, that one's already invisible. Let's do this one here. If I had this depth parameter and I wanted that to be invisible, I would just go to modify, and I would uncheck the box. Save it, and now it's an invisible parameter, okay? All right, oversimplifying a little bit because there's another little gotcha that we need to talk about, okay? But that's how I created those as invisible parameters, and then you load them in. Here's the little gotcha. You need to make sure you do that and turn it invisible before you load it into the family. That step had to happen first. Not a big deal, but just remember to do that. So when you're creating that shared parameter, uncheck the box, then load it into the family. It'll work great. So that's what made those things invisible. There's another really neat feature that got introduced into Revit very recently. It might have been 2016 R2 or possibly 2017, but it's very recent. And that is making a parameter not modifiable. If I go back to family types and we look down here at the 3 detail item parameters, what makes this whole thing work is the values in those detail items have to stay, the invisible right one has to stay right. The invisible left one has to stay left. If somebody comes into this family, edits it, and changes one of these values, nothing's going to stop them from doing that, and it will break the whole thing. Because when the comparison here, shower head to center, is made, it'll it'll be left and it will do the wrong thing. So the only way this works is if these three stay unique values. Now, making them invisible probably will be all that's necessary to make that happen, because the only person that would edit the family is somebody that's actually modifying it, and they probably won't mess with that. But just the same, you might want to make sure that nobody messes with it. So it's possible to create a parameter that cannot be user modifiable. So I'm going to click OK here and show you how to do that. So I'm going to go to Revit Express Tools and go to the Shared Parameter Manager, and I'll just create a new parameter here. Let me load that file. And I'm just going to create a new text parameter in this text grouping. I've already got one called temp, so let me create another one. I'm going to make it a text parameter. And I'm going to call this test. Okay? And I'm going to uncheck user modifiable. Click OK, or click create rather, to create it. There it is right there. Let me save that. Okay? And then if you go over to this load shared parameters tab, what you can actually do is in the same tool, you can actually take that shared parameter now and load it into the current project, in this case, the current family. So over here, there's an open master button. And when I click that, it will load the same shared parameter file from the other tab. Then I can come over here and expand text. Now, the way this works is you have to create a selection set over here. So I'm going to create a new selection set that I just call test and create that. And then I'm going to take this test parameter here and use the little button here and add it over there. It'll highlight in green because down here, green means instance. So it's going to default to an instance parameter. If you like, you can select the parameter, change it to type over here. Okay, and then if I kind of click away from that, you see how it turns to blue, right? So we could create it as either a type or an instance parameter. That's up to you. And then I just simply come down here to the bottom of the screen and choose load parameters. This will, tell me a little message here, make sure that it's okay and it's going to overwrite anything that's already there. And I'll say yes, and it'll say that was successful. Let's close out of here and take a look. Back to family types, text. And scroll down, and it was under other, and so there it is. There's my test parameter, okay? But notice how it's grayed out? What that means is I can't click here and change it. So user modifiable, when you turn that off, means quite literally you cannot modify it. So that's great. I have a non-modifiable parameter now, but I can't put a value into it. So it's not very useful. So I need to do one other thing, okay? So let me get rid of this. So here's the trick. What you really need to do is create these parameters first, as I've done. When I created them, I'm going to select each one and modify. I created them as shared parameters. So what I want to do here is actually create new parameters. I want to load those in and use them in place of the ones that are already here. To do that, I'm actually going to use a different Revit Express tools that has the feature of replace family parameter with a shared parameter. It does not have replace shared parameter with another shared parameter. So what I'm going to do here is switch these to family parameters and click OK. So that one, this one, and this one. Okay, so now those are family parameters. They're already set to the values I want. So this is important, right? So I've got them set there. Let's click OK. Next step, I'm going to go to Express Tools, Shared Parameter Manager. And I will load my file. And under Invisible Parameters, I'll select there, and I'm going to create 3 new parameters. INV_R, INV_C, INV_L. Now, INV is just what I like to put for a prefix. You don't have to do that. It's not required. I don't want these to be visible or modifiable, so I'm going to uncheck both sets of boxes for all 3 of those. And then, very important, I need all 3 of these to be family types parameters. So I'm going to choose family type and then detail items, okay, because that's the category that I'm using in this particular family. Okay, so that looks good. They're in invisible parameters, they're family types, they're detail items, they're all non-modifiable, they're all invisible. Click Create. Now I'm going to save that file and close it. Now, I would normally switch over here, but the trouble is, if we load them directly here, it'll just create 3 new parameters, and I'd have to do the formulas all over again. Okay, so just to show you what that looks like, back to family types. So notice that these formulas are looking at the current versions of those invisible parameters. So I want to preserve those formulas. So this is why I'm going to use a different Revit Express tool to help me do that. I'm going to use the family processor. So here's family processor right here. I'll click new settings just to clear anything that I already have set in this dialog. I'll go to change parameters and I'll click the replace with shared parameters tab. Okay, so notice there isn't a replace with family parameters tab. It's only replace with shared parameters. This is why I changed the names of these parameters. So I'm going to take invisible center, invisible left, invisible right, and add those to the list. Then I'm going to come over here and open up the list, and center I'm going to replace with C, and left I'm going to replace with L, and R I'm going to replace with right I'm going to replace with R. Okay, so that's all I'm going to do is replace those 3. Come over here to the select families and begin. You can do this on multiple family files, by browsing to a folder. I'm just going to do it to the current family file and click begin processing and continue, and it's finished. I'll close this. It'll ask me if I want to commit those changes. I'll say yes. And now if we go to family types, you can see that these parameter names got replaced. It used to say invisible center. Now it says invisible C. More importantly, it's preserved the value that I set of center, and notice that it's grayed out. So now these are set as proper non-modifiable parameters. So even if somebody edits the family here and tries to change it, they can't. So I've virtually made this foolproof. The only way they could mess it up now is to mess with these formulas, which hopefully they won't do. But I've kind of made this family even more stable and even more predictable in its behavior. So those are some advanced features that are available in shared parameters that are there in Revit, but they're so buried away deep in the shared parameter file, and you have to break the rules and modify it manually, that it can be a real challenge to use those. So if you want to create invisible parameters, or you want to create non-modifiable parameters, shared parameter manager is the tool for you. It is the way to go, and the shared parameter manager is a great tool for any management of shared parameters that you need to do, whether it's merging 2 together, creating a brand new shared parameter file, modifying existing shared parameters, deleting parameters, adding them, or taking advantage of these advanced features like invisible and non-modifiable. So I hope you found that useful. I hope some of those tips help you out in building your content and get you further on the path to managing your shared parameter files with ease. Thanks very much for watching.